the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Across the countless battlefields of the galaxy, relics of humanity's past lie forgotten, buried beneath the debris of 10,000 years of endless conflict. Some of these relics sleep in silence, their vigils ended, their duties complete. Others wait in the darkness, their systems dormant but not dead, their machine spirits patient but not peaceful. And when such relics are disturbed, when the sleeping giants of humanity's golden age are roused from their centuries of slumber, the galaxy itself trembles at what awakens. This is the story of one such awakening, a tale of ancient honor meeting savage brutality, of a warrior who has slept for 750 years, only to find that the enemies of mankind have not rested at all. This is what happens when Orks, those savage green-skinned horrors that plague humanity across the stars, stumble upon something they were never meant to find. This is what happens when they discover an ancient Custodian Dreadnought, one of the Emperor's own champions, sealed away in a tomb of adamantium and ceramite, waiting for a war that may never have come. To understand the magnitude of this encounter, we must first understand what it means to be of the Adeptus Custodes. We must grasp the terrible significance of what the Orks have found, and we must comprehend the cosmic irony of these particular forces meeting on some forgotten battlefield far from Terra's golden shores. The Adeptus Custodes stand apart from all other warriors in the Imperium of man. They are not simply enhanced humans, not merely transhuman warriors like the vaunted space marines who fight across 1,000,000 worlds. No, the Custodians represent something far greater, far more terrible in their perfection. They are the Emperor's companions, his personal guard, the golden sentinels who have stood watch over the master of mankind since before the Imperium itself drew its first breath. Where the Space Marines were created as mass-produced soldiers, designed to conquer the galaxy in their tens of thousands, the Custodians were crafted as individual masterpieces. Each one is unique, their genetic enhancement performed not through the implantation of organs into existing human stock, but through a complete cellular reconstruction that begins in infancy. The Emperor himself oversaw their creation in the earliest days, and the process used to forge them draws upon genetic lore that predates even the dark age of technology. Every Custodian is a work of art, a living weapon whose every molecule has been restructured to exceed the limits of human potential. The difference between a Space Marine and a Custodian has been described in many ways throughout Imperial history, but perhaps the most apt comparison is this. Space Marines are to baseline humans as the Emperor is to his Primarchs. The gap in capability is not merely significant, it is fundamental. A Custodian does not simply fight better than a Space Marine. They fight in an entirely different category of warfare, operating on a level that even veteran Astartes struggle to comprehend. This superiority manifests in every aspect of their being. A Custodian is stronger, faster, more resilient than even the mightiest Space Marine. Their reflexes operate on a level that borders on precognition. Their minds process tactical information in microseconds, and their combat prowess has been honed through training regimens that would break even the hardiest Astartes. When the Emperor walked among his armies during the Great Crusade, it was the Custodians who stood at his side. And when he faced the greatest threats the galaxy could offer, it was the golden-armored warriors of the Legio Custodes who carved a path through his enemies. There are tales from the Great Crusade that speak of battles where a small force of Custodians achieved what entire companies of Space Marines could not. On the world of Gyros Thravian, the Emperor personally led 1,000 Custodians against an Ork horde of such magnitude that it had stalled the advance of multiple Space Marine legions. The Custodians carved through over 100,000 greenskins, slaying them with such efficiency and brutal grace that the battle became legend. Only 3 Custodians fell in that engagement, and the Emperor himself honored their sacrifice by engraving their names into his personal armor, a testament to how precious each loss was to him. This is not to say that custodians are invincible. They can be overwhelmed. They can fall. But the cost of bringing down even a single one of these golden warriors is measured in the hundreds of enemy dead. And the Emperor's words on the matter have echoed through the millennia. He would rather watch 1,000 Space Marines die than lose a single custodian. This was not mere sentiment. It was a cold calculation of their true worth, an acknowledgement that each custodian represented genetic, knowledge, and martial perfection that could never be truly replicated. Yet for all their might, even custodians can be broken. The wars they fight are unimaginably brutal, and the enemies they face are often beyond the comprehension of mortal men. Demons that can rend reality itself, Xeno's war machines that dwarf Imperial titans, traitor primarchs whose very presence can shatter minds and corrupt souls. Against such foes, even the Emperor's finest can suffer wounds so catastrophic that their bodies cannot be saved by any conventional means. When this happens, when a custodian's flesh fails but their will remains unbroken, there exists one final recourse, one last way for them to continue their eternal vigil. They are interred within a dreadnought. The dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Custodes are not like those employed by the Space Marines. Just as the custodians themselves are superior to the Astartes, so too are their war machines crafted to a higher standard, incorporating technology and design principles that the Imperium can barely comprehend, let alone replicate. The most common pattern used by the Legio Custodes during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy was the Contemptor Achilles, though the even more formidable Contemptor Galatus was reserved for those warriors deemed worthy of anchoring a custodian battle line. A Contemptor Achilles dreadnought is a walking fortress, standing several times the height of a man, its frame constructed from materials and using techniques that belong more to the lost age of technology than to the degraded present of the 41st millennium. At its heart, sealed within a sarcophagus of blessed adamantium and surrounded by amniotic fluids that sustain what little remains of their physical form, rests the custodian himself. Only the most essential organic components remain: the brain, vital organs, enough biological matter to maintain the consciousness and will that once drove a body of superhuman perfection. The sarcophagus is connected to the dreadnought systems through a web of neural interfaces more sophisticated than anything used in standard Astartes dreadnoughts. The custodian does not merely pilot their new body, they become it. Every movement of the massive frame translates through their nervous system as naturally as their original limbs once did. Every sensor reading filters into their consciousness as clear as their original senses. The machine and the man merge into something that transcends both, a fusion of flesh and steel that represents the apex of the Imperium's war-making capability. The primary weapon of the Contemptor Achilles is the Achilles Dreadspear, a massive powered weapon modeled after the Guardian spears carried by custodians in their original forms. This is no crude melee implement. The Dreadspear incorporates a Corvus Las Pulsar, a laser weapon of devastating power, allowing the dreadnought to engage enemies at range before closing to deliver the killing blow with the spear's energized blade. The weapon can pierce armor that would turn aside the heaviest bolt shells, can cleave through the hulls of enemy vehicles, and in the hands of a custodian pilot possessing centuries of combat experience, becomes an extension of their will. Supporting the Dreadspear are typically a pair of Lastrum Stormbolters, weapons that pour out a withering hail of mass-reactive shells capable of shredding infantry formations and light vehicles. But it is not simply the weaponry that makes a custodian dreadnought so formidable. It is the warrior within, the consciousness that guides every motion, that calculates every tactical decision with the accumulated wisdom of lifetimes spent in the Emperor's service. Yet, for all this power, for all this terrible majesty, existence as a dreadnought is not a reward. It is a prison. The process of interment is brutal, beyond imagining. What remains of the Custodian's body after their catastrophic injuries is already a guide honneur. Horror, flesh torn beyond recognition, bones shattered, organs failing. The tech marines and artisans who perform the procedure must remove almost everything that remains, reducing the warrior to little more than a torso, vital organs, and the brain that houses their consciousness. What they leave behind is sealed within the sarcophagus, suspended in thick amniotic fluid that numbs sensation but cannot entirely eliminate pain. The neural connections that link the Custodian to their new form carry not just sensory data, but also the constant awareness of what they have lost. They can no longer feel the simple pleasure of drawing breath. They cannot know the warmth of terror's sun on their face, cannot taste food or feel the grip of a weapon in a hand of flesh and blood. Every moment of their existence is filtered through mechanical sensors and translated into approximations of sensation that can never truly replace what they once knew. More terrible still is the isolation. Between battles, Custodian dreadnoughts are placed in stasis sleep, their consciousness suspended in darkness that can last for decades or even centuries. This is not a mercy, despite what some might believe. It is a necessity. The neural interface required to operate a dreadnought places immense strain on the pilot's mind. Extended periods of consciousness within the machine body can lead to disorientation, confusion, a gradual erosion of self that transforms the warrior into something less than they were. Time itself becomes meaningless, memories blur and fade, and the distinction between the self and the machine begins to dissolve. When a Custodian dreadnought is awakened, it is always for war. They rise from their dreamless sleep to find themselves thrust immediately into combat. Their first moments of consciousness filled with tactical data, threat assessments, and the roar of battle. They fight with all the skill and fury they possessed in life. But underneath the mechanical precision and the devastating violence, there remains the ghost of the warrior they once were, struggling to remember what it felt like to be whole. Some dreadnoughts maintain their sanity across the centuries through sheer force of will, their dedication to duty, and their service to the Emperor, providing an anchor against the erosion of self. Others slowly lose themselves to the darkness between battles, awakening each time more confused, more distant from their humanity. A few embrace the transformation, allowing themselves to become more machine than man, finding a kind of peace in surrendering what they were to fully inhabit what they have become. But all of them understand the truth that lies at the heart of their existence. They are neither fully alive nor truly dead. They occupy a twilight realm between the two, bound to service that can only end when their machine body is destroyed and their consciousness is finally released into whatever fate awaits them beyond death. It is both the greatest honor a Custodian can receive and the cruelest fate imaginable, to continue fighting for the Emperor long past the point where death should have claimed them. This, then, is what sleeps in the darkness of some forgotten world, waiting for 750 years to pass while the galaxy continues its endless war without them. This is what the Orks are about to discover. To understand what happens when the Orks find this ancient Custodian dreadnought, we must first understand what the Orks are and how they think, if thinking is even the right word for what occurs in the minds of these savage, violent creatures. The Orks are perhaps the most successful species in the galaxy, not through intelligence or technology in the conventional sense, but through sheer biological persistence and an indomitable will to fight. The Orks were not always as they are now. Millions of years ago, during a war that predates human civilization by epochs incomprehensible to mortal minds, the ancient species known as the Old Ones created the Orks' ancestors as biological weapons. These original warriors, sometimes called the Krork, were designed to fight in the war in heaven, a conflict so vast and terrible that it scarred the galaxy itself and created the horror of the warp as it exists in the present day. The Krork were intelligent, disciplined, and equipped with technology that modern orcs could scarcely imagine. Some records suggest they stood as tall as 12 meters, towering over even the mightiest of their descendants. But the war in heaven ended, the old ones vanished or died, and the Krork degraded over the millions of years that followed. What remains are the orcs, creatures that retain the biological advantages of their engineered origins, but have lost much of the sophistication that once made them a truly organized threat. They are violent, crude, and obsessed with war to the exclusion of almost everything else. Their technology is ramshackle, their tactics straightforward to the point of being simplistic, and their language is a brutish corruption of human Gothic peppered with their own guttural dialect. Yet for all their apparent savagery, the orcs possess something that makes them uniquely dangerous. They are all psychic, not in the way that human psykers or elder warlocks manipulate the warp through conscious effort and training. No. Orc psychic ability operates on a far more fundamental level. Every orc generates a low-level psychic field, and when enough orcs gather in one place, these individual fields combine and amplify each other, creating what is known as the Gestalt psychic field, or, in the orc's own terminology, the energy of the great war host. This Gestalt field has several effects, some subtle and others quite overt. On the most basic level, it allows orcs to instinctively recognize dominance hierarchies. An orc doesn't need to be told who the biggest, strongest boss is. They simply know. The Gestalt field communicates this information on a level below conscious thought, ensuring that orc society naturally organizes itself according to the principle of might makes right. The bigger an orc is, the more presence they have in the Gestalt field, and the more other orcs will instinctively recognize their authority. But the Gestalt field does something far stranger and far more dangerous. It makes orc belief into reality, at least to a degree. This is not unlimited reality manipulation. Orcs cannot simply wish things into existence, and their technology does function according to actual physical principles. But the Gestalt field acts as a kind of psychic lubricant, making things work that by all reasonable standards should not work at all. An orc weapon might be nothing more than a pipe with nails sticking out of it, held together with rust and faith. But if an orc believes it's a shooter capable of firing bullets, the Gestalt field makes it so. An orc vehicle might look like it was assembled from scrap metal in a junkyard with no regard for mechanical engineering. Yet when an orc believes the painted red flames on its side make it go faster, the Gestalt field obliges and the vehicle actually does accelerate beyond what its engines should allow. Imperial forces have recovered orc weapons after battle only to find that in human hands, the devices don't function at all. The mechanisms simply don't work without an orc to believe in them. The more orcs gather in one place, the stronger this effect becomes. A lone orc is dangerous, but manageable. A mob of orcs is a serious threat. A horde of thousands or millions of orcs generates a Gestalt field so powerful that reality itself begins to bend around their collective belief. Their war machines become more deadly, their weapons more reliable, their leaders grow in size and strength, and the entire green tide becomes something greater than the sum of its parts. This gathering of orcs into massive war hosts is the natural state of their species. They are biologically driven to fight, and fighting attracts more orcs like moths to flame. When a particularly large or successful orc warlord begins conquering territory, word spreads through the Gestalt field itself, drawing greenskins from across entire star systems. These war hosts can grow to encompass millions of orcs, all united under the banner of the biggest and strongest among them, all driven by the same insatiable urge to find enemies and smash them into pulp. But orcs are not simply mindless brutes. They possess a kind of low cunning, a practical intelligence focused entirely on making war more efficiently. This is where the mech boys come in, the orc caste that serves as engineers and inventors for their species. Mech boys are born with an instinctive understanding of how to build weapons and vehicles, knowledge encoded into their very DNA by the old ones millions of years ago. A mech boy doesn't need to learn engineering. They simply know how to take a pile of scrap and turn it into a functional gun, how to weld together plates of salvaged armor and create a battle wagon, how to construct gargants that rival Imperial titans in size and destructive power. And mech boys love to loot. To an Ork mech, every battlefield is a treasure trove, every destroyed enemy vehicle is a source of useful parts, and every piece of technology is something to be taken apart, studied in their own crude fashion, and incorporated into new creations. They have no respect for the sanctity of human technology, no understanding of the machine spirits that Imperial tech priests revere. To a mech, a broken Imperial tank is just useful scrap, and if it can be welded onto an Ork battle wagon to make it shootier or choppier, all the better. This looting behavior extends to everything the Orks encounter. They steal weapons, vehicles, ammunition, food, building materials, and anything else that catches their attention. The Death Skulls clan has elevated looting to a kind of art form, believing that blue paint brings luck and that anything worth having is worth stealing. But all Orks engage in looting to some degree, because their entire approach to warfare is based on taking whatever they can from the battlefield and using it to make themselves stronger for the next fight. Ork technology, such as it is, reflects this scavenging mentality. An Ork gun might incorporate parts from a dozen different sources: Imperial Guard, Lass rifle components, Eldar power cells, Tau targeting systems, all held together with Orkish ingenuity and the unconscious support of the Gestalt field. To an outsider, these contraptions look like they should explode the moment they're used, and sometimes they do. But more often than not, they work exactly as the mech intended, because the combined belief of thousands of Orks makes them work. When an Ork war host descends upon a world, they strip it of everything useful. Factories are looted for materials, Imperial vehicles are scavenged for parts. Even civilians are sometimes taken as slaves to work in Ork workshops. The Orks leave behind nothing but devastation, and they move on to the next fight stronger than they were before, their ranks swelled by new recruits and their weapons enhanced with whatever they managed to steal. This combination of biological resilience, psychic ability, and aggressive scavenging makes the Orks one of the most persistent threats the Imperium faces. They cannot be truly destroyed, because Orks reproduce through spores rather than conventional breeding. Kill 1 million Orks on a world, and their spores will create millions more over the following years. They cannot be reasoned with, because war is not merely what they do, it is what they are, encoded into every cell of their being. And they cannot be contained, because every victory they achieve only draws more of them to the fight. The Imperium has faced Ork invasions of catastrophic scale throughout its history. During the Great Crusade, the Emperor himself led campaigns against Ork empires that spanned dozens of worlds. The Ullanor Crusade, which saw Horus elevated to the rank of War Master, was fought against an Ork empire so vast that it required the deployment of 100,000 Space Marines, 8 million Imperial Army troops, and hundreds of starships. Even then, the Orks were not truly defeated. They were merely scattered, driven back to wait for the next big boss to unite them. In the 32nd Millennium, during the War of the Beast, an Ork warlord of unprecedented size and intelligence nearly brought the Imperium to its knees. The Beast, as he came to be known, commanded Ork forces that reached terror itself, besieging humanity's homeworld and demonstrating capabilities that terrified the Imperium's leadership. These Orks spoke Gothic, sent ambassadors to negotiate, and employed strategies that suggested intelligence on par with human generals. The war cost the Imperium dearly, requiring desperate measures and enormous sacrifices to eventually triumph. What made the War of the Beast particularly horrifying was the revelation of what Orks could become under the right circumstances. The Orks of that era were larger, stronger, and smarter than the greenskins the Imperium typically faced. They built attack moons that could teleport across the galaxy, created gargants that dwarfed Imperial titans, and fielded technology that the Mechanicus could barely understand, let alone counter. And at their head stood the Beast himself, a creature so massive that he was mistaken for a vehicle until observers realized they were looking at an orc in armor, an orc whose physical presence dominated the battlefield like a force of nature. The War of the Beast demonstrated that the orcs the Imperium fights in the 41st millennium are, in some sense, a degraded version of what their species can be. The Great War host they create can elevate them beyond simple savagery, can unlock the potential encoded in their genes by the old ones so long ago. An orc in a sufficiently large and powerful war host becomes faster, stronger, smarter. Their technology improves, their strategic thinking becomes more sophisticated, and their threat level increases exponentially. The Custodes fought the Orks during the Battle of Gyros Thravian, and their victory was absolute. 1,000 golden warriors slew over 100,000 greenskins, with the loss of only 3 of their number. But that battle was fought with the Emperor personally leading the Custodians, and the Orks they faced, while numerous, were not unified under a warlord of the beast's caliber. Had those Custodians faced the organized, technologically advanced Orks of the War of the Beast era, the calculus of combat might have been very different. Now, in the 41st millennium, on some forgotten world far from Terra's light, a war host of Orks is about to discover something they have never encountered before. They are about to find a Custodian Dreadnought, one of the Emperor's finest warriors, sealed away for 7.5 centuries. And the question that hangs in the air, unanswered until the moment of contact, is this: what happens when an irresistible force of savage, green-skinned violence meets an immovable object of golden, gene-forged perfection? The world where this encounter takes place has no name that matters anymore. It was once catalogued by the administratum, given a designation that meant something to clerks and scribes, who logged its resources and strategic value. But that was centuries ago, before the shifting tides of war swept over this corner of the galaxy and left it behind, forgotten in the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Imperium. Now, it is simply another dead world, its imperial settlements long collapsed into ruins, its purpose and history lost to the turning of ages. The planet itself is unremarkable, a barren landscape of grey rock and red dust, broken by the skeletal remains of hive cities that once housed millions, but now stand empty and silent. The atmosphere is thin but breathable, the temperature extremes enough to kill an unprotected human, but easily survived by anyone with even basic environmental gear. There are no valuable resources here, nothing that would draw Imperial attention or Mechanicus interest. It is the kind of world that gets written off as a loss after whatever catastrophe befell it, marked with a note in some data vault that it might be suitable for recolonization in another millennium or two, when the Imperium has resources to spare for such endeavors. Beneath one of these ruined hives, deep in the sublevels that were once used for manufacturing or storage, lies a facility that was not recorded in any Imperial ledger. It was built during the Great Crusade, or perhaps in the early years of the Horus Heresy, when the galaxy was burning and loyalist forces needed places to retreat, rearm, and regroup. The facility is small by the standards of Imperial military installations, just a few chambers and corridors cut into the bedrock and reinforced with ferrocrete and ceramite. At its heart, in a vault sealed behind layers of blessed adamantium and protected by void shields that have continued functioning for 7.5 centuries, stands a Contemptor Achilles Dreadnought. The warrior within has been in stasis since before the Siege of Terra, placed in this hidden facility for reasons known only to those who are now long dead. Perhaps he was too badly damaged to fight in the final battles of the heresy. Perhaps he was stationed here to guard something, some relic or piece of intelligence that seemed important at the time. Perhaps he was simply forgotten in the chaos and horror of that age, left to sleep while the galaxy tore itself apart above him. The Dreadnought stands in the center of the vault, held upright by the stasis field that keeps him frozen in time. His golden armor, still gleaming despite the centuries, his weapons powered down but not degraded. Around him, the chamber is austere in the way that Custodian facilities always are. There is no decoration beyond the aquila etched into the walls, no concession to comfort or aesthetics. This is a place of pure function, designed to preserve and protect its occupant until such time as he is needed again. That time has never come. 750 years have passed. The heresy ended. The emperor was entombed upon the golden throne. The Imperium entered its long decline, trading the dreams of the Great Crusade for the grinding survival of the present age. And through it all, the Custodian has slept, his consciousness suspended in the space between moments, unaware of the time passing, of the galaxy changing, of everything he knew being transformed into something he would barely recognize. The facility's power has held. The machine spirits of the generators and the stasis field have maintained their function with the obsessive dedication that is their nature, performing the same tasks again and again without deviation or complaint for centuries. But the facility has not been entirely undisturbed. The world above has changed. Empires have risen and fallen, and most recently, a new presence has arrived on this forgotten planet. The Orks came to this world not by choice, but by accident. Their rock, a massive hollowed-out asteroid converted into a primitive spacecraft, was damaged during a space battle several systems away. The vessel's crude engines failed, and it drifted through the void for weeks before finally being caught by the gravity well of this nameless planet. The crash was spectacular, leaving a crater visible from orbit and scattering debris across hundreds of kilometers. Most of the Orks aboard were killed in the impact, but Orks are nothing if not resilient. Dozens survived, then hundreds as they began pulling their unconscious kin from the wreckage and reviving them with kicks, punches, and the occasional improvised surgery. Within days, the survivors had organized themselves under the leadership of the biggest and meanest among them, a war boss named Grimskull, who lost an arm in the crash, but replaced it with a power claw he salvaged from the rock's remains. Grimskull was not particularly clever, even by Ork standards, but he was huge, brutal, and possessed of the single-minded determination that characterizes the best Ork leaders. He looked around at his warband, counted maybe 300 boys all told, and declared that they were going to build a new ship and get back to the fighting. The problem was resources. The rock was beyond repair, its hull cracked beyond even Ork engineering's ability to fix. They would need materials, lots of them, if they wanted to construct anything spaceworthy. And while the planet had plenty of ruins to scavenge, most of what they found was rotted beyond use, corroded by centuries of exposure to the elements. It was a mech boy named Wargog who discovered the entrance to the underground facility. He had been poking around the ruins of the hive city, using a salvaged Auspex to scan for anything useful buried below, when he detected power signatures that didn't match the usual pattern of dead machinery. Real power, active and functioning, coming from deep beneath the surface. Wargog reported this to Grimskull, who promptly gathered his biggest boys and headed down to investigate. The entrance was hidden, covered by collapsed masonry and designed to be invisible to casual inspection. But Orks have never been subtle in their approach to obstacles. Grimskull and his mob simply started digging, using power claws and crude excavation equipment to tear through the rubble. It took them 3 days of constant work, but eventually they broke through into a corridor that was still intact, still lit by emergency lumens that had been burning for over 7 centuries. The Orks moved through the facility with a combination of caution and greed. They could tell this place was old, older than anything else they'd found on this world, and old human stuff was usually either valuable or dangerous, often both. Wargog stayed close to Grimskull, his Auspex chirping with readings that suggested massive power reserves somewhere ahead. The other boys kept their weapons ready, shooters and choppers held at the ready, expecting trouble. They didn't encounter any automated defenses. The facility's security systems had long since powered down. Their protocols expired after years of detecting no hostile activity. The Orks passed through corridors and chambers that showed no signs of decay, no rust or corrosion despite the centuries. Everything was perfectly preserved, frozen in the moment when it had been sealed away. And then they reached the vault. The door was massive, 3 meters thick, and reinforced with adamantium alloy that could withstand direct hits from weapons capable of leveling buildings. It was sealed, its locks engaged, and its mechanisms dormant. But Wargog's Auspex was screaming now, reporting power levels beyond anything they'd seen since the crash. Whatever was behind that door, it was big, and it was active, at least in terms of its power supply. Grimskull looked at the door, then at his boys, then back at the door. He grinned, showing his massive tusks. This was exactly the kind of challenge he enjoyed. The Orks set to work, and it took every piece of cutting equipment they had, every trick Wargog knew, and a lot of brute force application of power claws to finally breach the vault's seals. The door groaned as it opened, ancient servos engaging for the first time in centuries, an atmosphere equalized with a hiss that echoed through the chamber. The Orks poured into the vault, weapons ready, expecting a fight, or maybe a treasure hoard. What they found was beyond their comprehension at first. Standing in the center of the chamber, held upright by a shimmer in the air that their crude minds recognized as some kind of force field, was the largest suit of armor they had ever seen. It was golden, covered in elaborate details and symbols they couldn't read, and it held weapons that even the dimmest Ork could recognize as extremely dangerous. Wargog approached slowly, his mechanical eye whirring as he studied the Dreadnought. He had seen human war machines before, looted plenty of them, but this was different. The craftsmanship was beyond anything Imperial Guard or even Space Marine forces typically fielded. Every surface was perfect, no rivets or crude welds, just seamless construction that spoke of technology far beyond Ork understanding. And the power signature his Auspex was reading suggested this thing had enough energy to level a small city. "What is it, boss?" one of the boys asked, staring up at the Dreadnought with a mixture of fear and avarice. Grimskull stepped forward, his power claw crackling with energy. "Dunno, but it's shiny, and anything that's shiny is worth looting." The other Orks cheered, their fear evaporating in the face of potential plunder. This was what they lived for, finding valuable scrap, taking it for themselves, and using it to become bigger and stronger. The fact that this particular piece of scrap was clearly designed as a war machine and was probably more dangerous than anything they'd encountered before only made it more exciting. Wargog began circling the Dreadnought, his various scanning devices extended, reading every aspect of its construction. He could see power conduits, neural interface ports, weapon systems that made his fingers twitch with the desire to take them apart and figure out how they worked. But there was something else, something that made even his crude senses go on alert. This wasn't just a machine. There was something inside it, something that registered on his Auspex as a faint biological signature. "Boss," Wargog said slowly, "I think there's something alive in there." Grimskull stopped his examination of the Dreadnought's weapons and looked at his mech. "Alive? Like an Yumi?" "Dunno, boss, but something's in there, and it's been here a long time. Real long time." This information should have made the Orks cautious, should have made them think twice about disturbing whatever ancient horror was sealed inside this golden shell. But Orks are not cautious by nature, and the concept of leaving potential loot behind because it might be dangerous is fundamentally alien to them. Instead, Grimskull's grin widened. "Well then," he said, "let's wake it up and see if it wants to fight." The Orks laughed, a sound like thunder in the confined space of the vault. To them, this was perfect. They'd found something ancient and valuable, something that was probably extremely dangerous, and they were going to poke it until it woke up. If it attacked them, they'd have a good scrap. If it didn't, they'd tear it apart and loot everything useful. Either way, it was going to be entertaining. Wargog began examining the stasis field generator, trying to figure out how to shut it down. The technology was far beyond his understanding, but that had never stopped him before. He started pressing buttons, pulling levers, and when none of that worked, He resorted to the time-honored Ork engineering technique of hitting things with a wrench until they did what he wanted. The stasis field began to flicker. Inside his sarcophagus, for the first time in 750 years, the Custodian began to stir. Awakening is not instantaneous for a Dreadnought. The process is gradual, a slow emergence from the void of stasis into something approaching consciousness. For the Custodian, the first sensation is simply awareness itself. The realization that he exists after an eternity of not existing. There is no sense of time having passed, no memory of the darkness he has spent centuries within. There is only the transition from nothing to something, from absence to presence. The second sensation is pain. The neural interface that connects his organic remains to the Dreadnought systems is designed to translate sensory data, but it cannot filter out the constant background noise of damaged nerves and failing flesh. The Custodian's body, what little remains of it, is broken, has been broken for 750 years. The amniotic fluid in his sarcophagus sustains him, keeps his organs functioning and his brain alive, but it cannot heal the fundamental damage that led to his interment. The pain is always there, a dull roar that threatens to overwhelm everything else. But a Custodian does not succumb to pain. Pain is simply information, a signal to be acknowledged and then set aside in service to duty. The Custodian pushes past the discomfort, forces his consciousness to focus, to orient itself to the present moment. His systems begin to come online, one by one, as the stasis field fails and his Dreadnoughts, machine spirits, awaken from their own long sleep. Visual feeds first. The Custodian sees through optical sensors now, rather than eyes, and the transition takes a moment of adjustment. The world resolves into focus, painted in the enhanced spectrum that his systems provide. He sees the vault around him, recognizes it as the place where he was stationed so long ago. Everything is as it should be, perfectly preserved, exactly as he remembers. Then he sees the Orks. They are clustered around his stasis field generator, a mob of green-skinned Xenos in crude armor and carrying ramshackle weapons. One of them, larger than the rest and missing an arm replaced with a power claw, is clearly the leader. Another, festooned with mechanical augmentations and carrying what looks like scavenged Imperial tech, is attempting to interface with the generator's controls. The rest are simply watching, weapons ready, waiting to see what happens. The Custodian's tactical protocols engage automatically, analyzing the situation with speed born of centuries of combat experience. Enemy forces, approximately 300 Orks, primarily infantry with a few heavy weapon specialists. Threat level, significant in aggregate but manageable for a Custodian-grade war machine. Environmental factors, enclosed space, limited mobility options, friendly forces, none. Strategic objective, unknown until more information is gathered. But beneath the tactical assessment, beneath the cold calculation of threat and response, something else stirs. Memory. The Custodian remembers the last time he was conscious, the battle that broke his body and led to his interment. He remembers terror, the Emperor, the duties he swore to perform. He remembers brothers in arms, names and faces that should be as clear as if he had seen them yesterday, but which feel distant now, faded by the passage of time he cannot account for. How long has he been asleep? The last thing he remembers is being placed in stasis, told that he would be awakened when his skills were needed. But looking at these Orks, at their equipment and appearance, something feels wrong. They are using scavenged Imperial gear, but the design patterns are not ones he recognizes. The technology looks degraded, cruder than what the Imperium fielded during the Great Crusade. And the Orks themselves seem different somehow, smaller and less organized than the greenskin hordes he fought in his previous life. The stasis field fails completely, collapsing with a hum that resonates through the vault. The Custodian feels the full weight of his Dreadnought body for the first time in however long he has been dormant. 50 tons of adamantium and ceramite and weapons, all responding to his will as naturally as his original body once did. He flexes one massive hand experimentally, feeling the servos engage and the joints articulate with perfect precision. The Orks notice the movement. Of course they do. Shouting erupts from the mob, a combination of excitement and alarm in their guttural language. The Custodian understands Orkish well enough, having fought the Greenskins across dozens of worlds. They are arguing about whether to attack immediately or wait to see what he does. The war boss is urging caution, which is unusual for an Ork, suggesting perhaps more intelligence than the average Greenskin possesses. The Custodian could speak, could attempt communication, could try to understand why there are Orks in this facility and what has happened in the time since he was placed in stasis. But he is a warrior of the Adeptus Custodes, and these are Xenos invaders who have breached an Imperial facility and are attempting to loot its contents. The appropriate response is clear. The Custodian's hand moves to the Achilles dreadspear mounted on his arm, his systems bringing the weapon online with a thought. "For the Emperor," he says, his voice emerging from Vox speakers as a mechanical approximation of his original speech. "You will die." The Orks barely have time to react before the dreadspear's last pulsar opens fire. The weapon is a directed energy device of devastating power, designed to punch through the armor of enemy vehicles and fortifications. Against unarmored Ork infantry, even the tough green-skinned Xenos, it is catastrophically effective. The first beam catches 3 Orks who were standing too close together, vaporizing them in a flash of superheated plasma. The second shot takes apart a Nob who was raising his shooter, burning through his chest and leaving nothing but ash and the smell of cooked meat. The vault erupts into chaos. The Orks scatter, seeking cover behind whatever they can find, returning fire with their crude weapons. Bullets and energy blasts impact against the Custodian's armor, sparking off the blessed adamantium without leaving so much as a scratch. His storm bolters answer, each burst of mass reactive shells tearing through Ork flesh and bone with mechanical precision. 3 more Orks fall, then 5, then a dozen. Their bodies reduced to component elements by weapons that were designed to kill the enemies of the Emperor. But the Orks are not running. This is the difference between these Xenos and more sensible enemies. Any rational force would have retreated the moment the Dreadnought activated, recognizing that they were hopelessly outmatched. But Orks don't think that way. To them, this is the best thing that could have happened. They came looking for loot, and they found a fight against something big and dangerous. This is what they live for. This is what they were created for, in the final analysis. The Orks charge forward with gleeful roars, their fear transmuted into excitement, their survival instinct completely overridden by the biological imperative to fight. Grimskull leads the charge, his power claw crackling as he swings it at the Dreadnought's legs. The blow connects, and for a moment the war boss feels a surge of triumph. But the power claw, which could shear through Space Marine armor with ease, barely scratches the Custodian's leg plating. The technology gap between Ork engineering and what the Custodians fielded during the Great Crusade is simply too vast. Grimskull's weapon is formidable by the standards of the 41st Millennium, but it is nothing compared to what the Emperor's finest were equipped with. The Custodian responds with brutal efficiency. The dread spear comes down, its powered blade slicing through Grimskull's torso as if the war boss were made of paper rather than muscle and bone. The Ork leader has time for one final roar of defiance before the weapon's energy field reduces him to smoking meat. His body falls in 2 pieces, and the gestalt field that held the warband together shudders at the loss of its primary anchor. But Orks do not surrender when their leader falls. Instead, they become even more frenzied, fighting now for dominance as much as survival, each one hoping to prove themselves the new boss through the simple expedient of killing everyone else. Some continue attacking the Dreadnought, their weapons having no meaningful effect, but their determination unshaken. Others turn on each other, settling old scores while the opportunity presents itself. The Custodian kills without mercy or hesitation. This is what he was created for, what he was trained for across decades of the most rigorous martial education the Imperium can provide. Every movement is precise, every attack calculated to maximum efficiency. The Dreadspear sweeps through Ork ranks like a scythe through grain. His Stormbolters maintain a constant rate of fire, each burst claiming another life. His armored body moves with a grace that seems impossible for something so massive, dodging attacks that could potentially damage his systems while maintaining constant offensive pressure. Wargog, the mech who discovered the facility, realizes quickly that fighting is pointless. He is smarter than most Orks. Smart. Enough to recognize when retreat is the only viable option. While the others are dying, he backs towards the vault entrance, his various augmentations allowing him to move faster than his bulk would suggest. He makes it to the corridor, then beyond, fleeing up towards the surface while the sounds of slaughter echo behind him. The Custodian notes the mech's retreat, but does not pursue. His priority is eliminating the immediate threat, and there are still over 200 Orks in the vault with him, all trying desperately to bring him down through sheer weight of numbers. It won't work. It can't work. The gap in capability is too vast, the difference in training and equipment too fundamental. 5 minutes. That's all it takes. 5 minutes from the moment the Custodian opens fire to the moment the last Ork falls, its skull crushed beneath the Dreadnought's massive foot. The vault floor is carpeted with Xenos dead, the walls splattered with their blood, the air thick with the stench of burned flesh and discharged weapons. The Custodian stands in the center of it all, his armor stained but undamaged, his weapons still functional, his systems reporting minimal energy expenditure. 300 Orks. He has killed 300 Orks in 5 minutes, suffering exactly 0 damage in return. By the standards of the Adeptus Custodes, this qualifies as barely worth mentioning. During the Battle of Gyros Thravian, 1,000 Custodians killed over 100,000 Orks. The Emperor himself commemorated only the 3 Custodians who fell in that battle, ignoring the Xenos dead as beneath notice. This skirmish in a forgotten vault is nothing by comparison. But to the Custodian, standing in the aftermath of his first combat in 750 years, it is significant for what it represents. He is still functional, still deadly, still capable of performing his duty. The centuries of stasis have not degraded his combat effectiveness. The body of flesh and blood may be gone, but the warrior within remains as sharp as ever. Yet there are questions now, urgent ones that demand answers. Why were Orks in an Imperial facility? How did they find this place? What has happened to the Imperium in the time since he was placed in stasis? The Custodian needs information, needs to understand the current strategic situation before he can determine his next actions. And there is one Ork left who might provide some of those answers. The mech, Wargog, is fleeing up through the facility's corridors, heading for the surface. The Custodian engages his Dreadnought's tracking systems, locking onto the Ork's energy signature. Then he begins to pursue, his massive frame moving through the corridors with surprising speed. The mech has a head start, but a Custodian Dreadnought can move faster than most would expect, and Wargog is burdened by his crude augmentations and the panic that drives his flight. The Custodian catches up to the mech, just as Wargog reaches the bow surface. The Ork bursts out of the facility entrance into the grey daylight, and for a moment, he thinks he has escaped. Then the Dreadnought emerges behind him, its golden armor somehow even more impressive in natural light than it was in the vault's artificial illumination. Wargog turns, his last shred of courage asserting itself. He raises the crude plasma weapon he has been carrying, aims it at the Dreadnought's optical sensors, and fires. The plasma bolt strikes true, a hit that would blind most Imperial war machines. But the Custodian's sensors are redundant and heavily shielded. The plasma dissipates against his armor, leaving nothing but a scorch mark. The Dreadspear comes forward, its powered blade stopping centimeters from Wargog's throat. The mech freezes, every survival instinct screaming at him to remain perfectly still. The Custodian looms over him, an angel of death in golden armor, and when he speaks, his voice is like the grinding of ancient machinery. "You will answer my questions," the custodian says. "What year is it? What has happened to the Imperium?" Wargog's mind races. He is an orc, not particularly intelligent by the standards of other species, but smart enough to realize that his life depends on his answers. The problem is, he doesn't really understand imperial dating or history. Orcs don't think in those terms. They remember fights and bosses and notable scraps, but they don't keep calendars or maintain historical records. "Dunno the year, boss," Wargog manages to say. "But the Humies, they're still around, still fighting, still getting crumped by boys like us." The custodian processes this information. The Imperium still exists, which is something. But the Orcs' mention of constant fighting suggests that whatever peace might have followed the heresy has not lasted. The galaxy is still at war, still requiring the services of warriors like him. "The Emperor?" the custodian asks, his voice carrying a weight that makes even the Orc feel the importance of the question. Does he still reign from terror? Wargog doesn't really understand what the custodian is asking about. Orcs have only the vaguest concept of the God Emperor, seeing him mostly as the biggest boss the humans have. But he knows terror is where the most important Humies live, and he vaguely remembers hearing about some kind of fight there a long time ago. "The Emperor. Yeah, the Humies still worship him. Got his throne on terror and everything." The custodian feels something that might be relief, if relief is an emotion Dreadnoughts can experience. The Emperor lives, terror stands, the Imperium endures. These are the fundamentals, the bedrock upon which everything else is built. Whatever else has changed, these truths remain constant. "How long?" the custodian asks. "How long since the Horus heresy?" Wargog just stares blankly. He has no idea what Horus heresy means. It just sounds to him, human words that might as well be in a different language. The custodian realizes he is not going to get useful temporal information from this source. The Orc simply doesn't have the context to answer. "You breached an Imperial facility," the custodian continues. "This is a crime against the Emperor and his Imperium. The standard sentence is death." Wargog knows he is about to die. It's written in every line of the Dreadnought's posture, in the cold tone of its mechanical voice. And a part of him, the part that is purely Orc, feels something approaching satisfaction. He found something big and dangerous. He woke it up, and now it's going to kill him. That's how it should be. That's the way of things. But before the custodian can deliver the final blow, a sound echoes across the ruined cityscape. It is the roar of crude engines, the thunder of Orc war machines approaching. Wargog's escape did not go unnoticed. The other Orcs on the planet, those who stayed behind at the crash site, heard the sounds of battle coming from the ruins. And Orcs, being Orcs, they immediately rushed towards the fight, eager to join in the fun. Now they are arriving, dozens of ramshackle vehicles tearing across the wasteland, carrying hundreds more boys who are ready and willing to die for the chance at a good scrap. The custodian's sensors detect them, calculating numbers and threat profiles with practiced efficiency. This is no longer a skirmish. This is a battle. The custodian looks down at Wargog, his dread spear still hovering near the mech's throat. For a moment, he considers simply killing the Orc and dealing with the approaching horde. But something stays his hand, some calculation of utility that suggests living enemies can sometimes be more useful than dead ones. "Run," the custodian says, and Wargog doesn't need to be told twice. He bolts, running faster than he has ever run in his life, not even caring that he is abandoning his chance at loot or glory. The Dreadnought watches him go, then turns to face the approaching Orc horde. The battle about to unfold will be remembered, if anyone survives to remember it, as one of the strangest encounters in this sector's history. An ancient warrior of the Emperor's personal guard, awakened from centuries of sleep, facing a horde of Orcs who have no understanding of what they are attacking. It is a clash between the Imperium's finest and its most persistent enemies, a microcosm of the eternal war that has consumed the galaxy for millennia. The Custodian activates his Vox speakers, broadcasting on all Imperial frequencies, hoping that someone, somewhere, might receive his signal. His message is simple, a statement of identity and position, a declaration that one of the Emperor's guardians still stands vigil on this forgotten world. This is Custodian Dreadnought designation Aureus, Contemptor Achilles Pattern of the Legio Custodes. I am engaging Xenos forces on Imperial soil, for the Emperor, for terror, for humanity. The message transmits out into the void, carried on ancient broadcast protocols that predate the current Imperium by millennia. Whether anyone receives it, whether any Imperial forces are close enough to respond, the Custodian does not know. It doesn't matter. He has his duty. He will hold this ground until he falls, or until the Orks are destroyed. This is what he was created for. This is what he has been preserved for across 7.5 centuries of sleep. The Ork horde closes the distance, their vehicles kicking up clouds of red dust as they race toward their target. They can see the Golden Warrior standing alone, can see the bodies of their comrades scattered around the facility entrance. And they are not deterred. They are Orks. This is what they do. Aureus raises his dread spear, his storm bolters targeting the closest vehicles, his combat protocols engaging fully for the first time since his awakening. The battle begins again, and this time it will not end in 5 minutes. This time, the Custodian faces not hundreds, but potentially thousands of enemies, a horde that will test even his capabilities. But he does not retreat. Custodians do not retreat. They stand their ground, and they fight. And if they fall, knowing they have done their duty to the Emperor and to humanity. 750 years may have passed, but some things never change. The Orks remain the savage enemies they have always been. And the Custodes remain the Emperor's finest warriors, golden angels of death who will defend humanity until their final breath. The Ork vehicles open fire, crude weapons spitting bullets and rockets towards the Dreadnought. Aureus responds with devastating precision, his storm bolters tracking targets with inhuman accuracy, his dread spear's last pulsar burning through armor plating and reducing Ork drivers to ash. The first wave crashes against him like water against stone, and when it recedes, only the Custodian remains standing. But there are more waves coming. Always more waves, the Silmarseen. Orks will keep coming until they are all dead, or until the Dreadnought falls. This is the nature of the eternal war, the conflict that has defined the galaxy for longer than any human civilization has existed. And Aureus, awakened from his long sleep into this nightmare of endless battle, embraces it with the grim determination that characterizes all of the Emperor's chosen. The dust rises, the weapons thunder, and the war continues as it always has, as it always will, until the very stars burn out and the galaxy itself grows cold and dark. Hours pass. The battle becomes a grinding attrition as wave after wave of Orks throw themselves at the Custodian. Aureus fights with mechanical precision, his every motion calculated to maximum efficiency. But even he has limits. His weapons run hot from constant use, his power cells begin to drain, and the Orks, for all their stupidity and savagery, are learning. They are adapting their tactics, trying different approaches, probing for weaknesses. A mech boy rigged a crude explosive device to a squig and sent it racing toward the Dreadnought. Aureus destroyed it with a bolt shell, but the explosion was large enough to actually stagger him, the first time anything has meaningfully affected his balance since the battle began. The Orks cheer at this small victory, and more explosives follow, trying to repeat the success. A mob of knobs, larger and stronger than the average Ork, coordinate their attack, coming at the Custodian from multiple angles simultaneously. Aureus kills 3 of them, but one manages to land a solid blow with a power claw against his leg joint. The attack doesn't penetrate, but it does score the armor, leaving a gouge that speaks to the Ork's strength. The knob doesn't survive long enough to celebrate, but the damage is done. These are minor victories for the Orks, barely worth noting in the broader context of the battle, but they represent something significant. The Xenos are not rooting. They are not breaking. Despite losses that would have shattered any conventional army, despite watching hundreds of their fellows die in the most brutal ways imaginable, the Orks continue to press the attack with undiminished enthusiasm. This is the horror of fighting the Orks. They cannot be demoralized. They cannot be frightened into retreat. Every death only excites the survivors more, every explosion and burst of violence adding to the Gestalt field's energy, making the remaining Orks stronger and more aggressive. What would have been a massacre against any other enemy becomes a battle of attrition, and attrition is the one kind of war where numbers matter most. Aureus calculates his remaining ammunition, his power reserves, the projected duration of combat at the current consumption rate. The numbers are not favorable. He can continue fighting for perhaps another 6 hours at this intensity before his primary weapons systems will need to shut down for cooling. His power cells can maintain operation for perhaps 3 days of continuous combat, but that assumes he isn't hit by anything that damages his generators, and the Orks show no signs of running out of reinforcements. The Custodian considers his options. He could attempt to break through the Ork lines and withdraw to a more defensible position. His Dreadnought is faster than most of the Xenos' vehicles, and he could potentially lose them in the ruins of the Hive city. But that would mean abandoning the facility he was stationed to protect, leaving it open for the Orks to loot. 750 years he has waited here. He will not dishonor that vigil by fleeing now. He could attempt to call for reinforcement, broadcasting on Imperial frequencies in hopes that some nearby fleet or garrison will respond. But he has been broadcasting since the battle began, and there has been no answer. This region of space may be too remote, too far from any Imperial presence for help to arrive in time. Or he can simply continue fighting, holding this position until the Orks are destroyed or until his own systems fail. This is the path most consistent with his duty as a Custodian, the choice that best honors his oath to the Emperor. It is also the path most likely to result in his permanent destruction. But permanence has never been a concern for warriors who have already died once, who exist in the twilight between life and death. Aureus makes his decision. He will hold, he will fight, and if he falls, he will take as many of the Xenos with him as possible, ensuring that even in death he performs his duty to the utmost of his ability. The battle continues into the evening, the planet's dim sun sinking toward the horizon and casting long shadows across the battlefield. The carpet of Ork dead grows thicker, bodies piled upon bodies, the stench of death thick in the thin atmosphere. Aureus stands in the center of it all, his golden armor now stained with Xenos blood, his weapons glowing from constant use, but his determination unshaken. And then something changes. The Ork attacks begin to slow, becoming less coordinated, less aggressive. The Gestalt field that has sustained them is weakening, thinned by the sheer number of casualties. Where there were thousands of Orks, there are now only hundreds, and they are beginning to realize that this battle cannot be won. Even Orks have a breaking point, a threshold beyond which their biological imperative to fight gives way to simple self-preservation. Wargog, the mech who fled earlier, watches from a distance as the horde begins to disintegrate. He has seen the entire battle, has watched the Golden Warrior cut through his species like a farmer reaping grain, and his crude but functional mind has reached a conclusion. This thing, this ancient war machine, is beyond anything the Orks on this planet can handle. To continue fighting is to simply feed more boys into its guns. He begins spreading the word, using his status as one of the few surviving specialists to convince the other Orks to withdraw. It takes time, and there are plenty of boys who would rather die fighting than retreat, but gradually the message takes hold. The Orks begin to fall back, their vehicles withdrawing from the battle, their mobs dispersing into the ruins. They are not fleeing in panic. They are conducting a tactical withdrawal, pulling back to regroup and reassess. Aureus watches them go, his targeting systems tracking every vehicle, every orc that stumbles away from the kill zone. He could pursue, could hunt them down across the wasteland and ensure not a single Xenos survives. But his ammunition is low, his power cells nearly depleted, and his systems are in desperate need of maintenance. The logical choice is to let them retreat, to fortify his position, and prepare for the next assault, which will surely come once the Orks have had time to rest and gather reinforcements. The Custodian stands alone as night falls, surrounded by the dead, his armor glowing faintly in the darkness. He has killed over 800 Orks in a single day of combat. By the standards of his fellow Custodians from the era of the Great Crusade, this is respectable but not exceptional. But for a Dreadnought who has been dormant for 7.5 centuries, who awakened to find himself alone and cut off from any support, it is a testament to the enduring quality of the Emperor's finest. Aureus begins conducting battlefield triage on his own systems, using internal diagnostics to assess damage and prioritize repairs. His armor has held, but there are dozens of minor stress fractures that will need attention. His primary weapons are functional, but desperately need cooling and maintenance. And his power cells are at 30% capacity, enough for perhaps one more engagement of this intensity before he will need to find a way to recharge. The facility behind him is still intact, its generators still functioning. Aureus could return to the vault, could interface with the facility's power systems and restore his reserves. But that would mean leaving the surface undefended, allowing the Orks to potentially regroup and attack while he is immobilized. The Custodian weighs the risks and decides to remain vigilant, to maintain his watch, even if it means operating at reduced capacity. Through the night, Aureus stands guard. He does not sleep, does not rest, does not allow his attention to waver for even a moment. This is what Dreadnoughts do. They stand watch when others cannot, maintaining vigil across the hours and days and years, their mechanical bodies requiring no sustenance beyond power, and their consciousness requiring no comfort beyond the knowledge that they are performing their duty. As dawn breaks over the wasteland, painting the ruins in shades of grey and red, Aureus receives something he has not heard since his awakening. A transmission, faint and distorted, but unmistakably imperial in origin. Someone has received his broadcast. Someone is responding. The message is brief, crackling with interference, but its meaning is clear. An Imperial Navy cruiser, operating in the neighboring system, detected the Custodian's transmission and has diverted to investigate. They will arrive in orbit within 48 hours, at which point they can provide fire support and evacuation. The captain's voice is tinged with awe and disbelief when he addresses Aureus, clearly unable to believe that he is actually speaking to a Custodian from the era of the Great Crusade. Aureus acknowledges the transmission, confirming his position and tactical situation. 2 days. He must hold this position for 2 more days. Then help will arrive, and he can finally leave this forgotten world, can return to Terra, and resume his service to the Emperor in whatever form that takes in this new age he has awakened into. But first, he must survive. And survive means dealing with the Orks, who will undoubtedly attack again. They have had a night to regroup, to treat their wounded, to gather whatever reinforcements remain on the planet. The next assault will come, and it will likely be everything they have left, a final desperate attempt to bring down the Golden Warrior before he can escape. Aureus spends the morning preparing. He returns to the facility, interfaces with its power systems, and begins the slow process of recharging his cells. While he does this, he uses the facility's auspex to scan the surrounding area, tracking Ork movements and building a tactical picture of what he faces. The numbers are sobering. Perhaps 3,000 Orks remain on the planet, down from the estimated 4,000 that arrived in the rock, but still a significant force. By midday, the Orks begin their advance. They come not in a disorganized rush, but in something approaching military formation, their vehicles arrayed in squadrons, their infantry moving in mobs that show at least rudimentary coordination. Wargog is leading them, his crude understanding of tactics guiding the assault. He has studied the Custodian's capabilities, has identified patterns and potential weaknesses. This attack will be more sophisticated than the previous one, more dangerous. Aureus emerges from the facility, his weapons fully loaded, his power cells restored to full capacity. He surveys the approaching horde, calculates firing solutions and defensive positions, and prepares to sell his existence as dearly as possible. If he falls here, if his machine body is destroyed before the Imperial cruiser arrives, then at least he will have held his ground, will have performed his duty to the last. The battle begins again, and this time it is even more brutal than before. The Orks have learned from their previous failures, have adapted their tactics to account for the Custodian's capabilities. They focus their heavy weapons on specific points, trying to overwhelm his defenses through concentrated fire, rather than scattered attacks. They use smoke screens and debris to obscure his targeting, making it harder for him to achieve the perfect kill ratios he managed in the first engagement. Aureus adapts in turn, his centuries of combat experience allowing him to counter each new tactic as it emerges. When the Orks try to blind him with smoke, he switches to thermal and motion tracking. When they attempt to flank him, he repositions to maintain optimal firing angles. When they send waves of cheap troops to exhaust his ammunition, he prioritizes targets, focusing on specialists and heavy weapons, while letting the lesser threats close to melee range, where his dread spear can dispatch them more efficiently. The hours grind on, and the Custodian begins to accumulate damage. A lucky rocket strike cracks one of his optical sensors, reducing his visual coverage by 15%. A power claw manages to shear off one of his storm bolters at the mounting point, eliminating half of his close-range firepower. A demolition charge detonates near his left leg, damaging the joint and reducing his mobility. These are not catastrophic injuries, but they accumulate, degrading his combat effectiveness degree by degree. The Orks pay for every hit with dozens of their own dead, but they keep coming, driven by the Gestalt field and the simple Orkish love of violence. They are fighting the enemy of their dreams, a target that is both incredibly dangerous and seemingly unkillable, and their joy at this situation overrides even their survival instincts. By the time the sun begins to set on the second day, the battlefield has become an abattoir. Thousands of Orks lie dead, their bodies creating literal walls that the survivors must climb over to reach the Custodian. Aureus stands in the center of the carnage, his armor scorched and battered, his weapons glowing red from heat, his power reserves depleted to critical levels, but he still stands, still fights, still performs his duty. And then, as the last light fades from the sky, he hears the roar of atmospheric engines. The Imperial cruiser has arrived early, its combat landers dropping through the atmosphere like vengeful angels, their weapons blazing as they strafe the Ork positions. The Orks, already exhausted and demoralized by 2 days of continuous combat, break completely, fleeing in all directions as the Imperium's wrath descends upon them. Within hours, the battle is over. Imperial Navy armsmen, supported by a detachment of Space Marines who happen to be aboard the cruiser, sweep the area and eliminate the remaining Orks with brutal efficiency. The threat is neutralized, the Xenos eradicated, and the Forgotten World is once again secure, at least for the moment. Aureus remains standing as the Imperial forces approach, his weapons powering down, his systems finally allowed to rest after 2 days of continuous combat. An officer, a Navy captain whose uniform is pristine compared to the Custodian's battered armor, approaches and renders a formal salute. "Honored Ancient," the captain says, his voice carrying genuine reverence. "It is our privilege to render aid. Your transmission was received and relayed to the highest authorities. Terra itself has been notified of your awakening, and orders have been issued for your immediate transport to the Imperial Palace." Terra, the Imperial Palace, the Emperor. After 750 years, Aureus is going home. The thought should bring relief. perhaps even joy. But the Custodian feels only a hollow acknowledgement. He has performed his duty, held his ground, protected Imperial territory against Xenos incursion. This is what he was created for, what he exists to do. There is satisfaction in mission completion, but nothing approaching happiness. "I am ready for transport," Aureus says, his mechanical voice betraying none of the complexity of emotion that might still exist somewhere in the organic remnants of his being. "For the Emperor, for Terra, for humanity." The Navy personnel begin preparations to move the Dreadnought, using massive cargo lifters to transport his 50-ton frame to a waiting lander. The process takes hours, and throughout it all, Aureus remains motionless, allowing the tech priests who have accompanied the naval forces to perform preliminary diagnostics and repairs. They work with reverence bordering on religious awe, touching his armor with hands that shake slightly, murmuring prayers to the Omnissiah and to the Emperor himself. As the lander lifts off, carrying Aureus away from the battlefield and towards the cruiser waiting in orbit, the Custodian takes one final look at the world where he spent 7.5 centuries in sleep. It is a dead place, a forgotten place, a world that will likely remain empty for centuries more before the Imperium has resources to recolonize it. But for 2 days, it was a battlefield. And for 2 days, one of the Emperor's finest stood vigil. Upon its surface, the journey back to Terra will take weeks, even with the fastest warp routes. Aureus will spend that time in a kind of semi-stasis, conscious but not active, his mind processing the changes he will inevitably encounter. 750 years. The heresy is long over. The Emperor is entombed upon the Golden Throne. The Imperium has evolved into something that might be unrecognizable to someone from the Great Crusade. And the Custodes themselves, what has become of them in all that time? How many of his brothers still serve? How has the role of the Legio Custodes changed in an Imperium without the Emperor's active guidance? These questions will be answered in time. For now, Aureus simply exists, a warrior out of time, a relic of a golden age awakened into a darker present. He has survived his encounter with the Orks, has proven that even after centuries of sleep, the Emperor's Custodians remain the finest warriors humanity has ever produced. But survival is not the same as triumph, and the cost of his vigil is measured not just in Ork dead, but in the accumulated weight of isolation and loss that comes with being a Dreadnought. As the cruiser enters the warp for its journey to Terra, Aureus has time to contemplate what he has experienced. The battle with the Orks was, in purely tactical terms, unremarkable by the standards of the Legio Custodes. He has fought in engagements far larger, against enemies far more dangerous than a few thousand greenskins on a forgotten world. But the context makes all the difference. He fought alone, cut off from all support, awakening into a situation where he had no intelligence about the current state of the galaxy, no knowledge of whether the Imperium even still existed. The experience has revealed something about his own nature that troubles him, though trouble might be the wrong word for what a Dreadnought can feel. During the battle, he noticed that his reactions were purely tactical, devoid of the emotional context that once accompanied his actions. When he killed the Ork warboss, there was no satisfaction in the victory, no sense of triumph at eliminating a threat. There was only the mechanical acknowledgement that an objective had been achieved and calculations about how to address the next priority. Is this what he has become? A being of pure function, stripped of everything that made him not just a warrior, but a person. The organic portions of his brain still exist, still process thought and memory, but they are filtered through so many layers of mechanical interface that the distinction between what is him and what is the Dreadnought has become meaningless. He remembers having emotions, remembers what it felt like to experience pride or anger or determination as something more than abstract concepts. But those memories feel distant now, like recollections of someone else's life. The tech priests who examine him during the journey are amazed by his condition. His Contemptor Achilles chassis is older than the Imperium itself in its current form, predating even the Horus heresy. Yet every system functions at nearly optimal efficiency. The technology used in his construction is so advanced that the Mechanicus representatives aboard the cruiser treat him not just as a warrior, but as a holy relic, a piece of the Omnissiah's work from an age when such perfection was still achievable. They ask him questions about the facility where he was stationed, about the equipment and technology it contained. Aureus answers what he can, but much of what they want to know was never his concern. He was a warrior, not a tech priest or logistician. His purpose was to stand guard, to fight if necessary, and to ensure that whatever secrets the facility held remained secure. The details of those secrets were above his clearance level, known only to the Custodian leadership and perhaps to the Emperor himself. One of the tech priests, a magos named Talvon, whose extensive augmentations make him more machine than human, asks a question that gives Aureus pause. Ancient One, do you remember who placed you in that facility? Do you recall who gave the order for your vigil? Aureus searches his memories, trying to recall the faces and voices from 7.5 centuries ago. There was a Custodian officer, he thinks, someone senior to him in rank, if not necessarily in combat capability. Constantine Valdor? No, that doesn't feel right, though Valdor was the Captain General during that era. Someone else gave the order, someone whose name refuses to surface in Aureus's recollection. I do not remember, he admits, and the words carry a weight beyond their simple meaning. If he cannot remember who stationed him there, what else has he forgotten? How much of his past has been eroded by the passage of time and the mechanical nature of his existence? The concern must show somehow in his responses, because Magos Talvon makes what might be a sympathetic gesture, though it is hard to tell with someone so extensively augmented. Memory degradation is common in dreadnoughts of your age, honored ancient. The neural interface, magnificent as it is, cannot perfectly preserve organic memory across centuries of stasis. That you retain as much as you do is testament to both your personal discipline and the superior construction of your chassis. Many dreadnoughts, of far younger vintage, have lost far more. This is meant to be comforting, but it serves only to highlight the fundamental horror of Aureus's existence. He is slowly forgetting himself, piece by piece, memory by memory. Eventually, if he continues to serve as a dreadnought for long enough, there will be nothing left of the man he was. Only the warrior will remain, a ghost of purpose inhabiting a shell of metal and ceramite. The warp journey gives Aureus more time than he has had in centuries to simply think, to process not just tactical information, but existential questions about the nature of his service and the price of his continued existence. In the darkness between battles, when he was in stasis, there was no opportunity for such reflection. Now, kept conscious for the journey so that he can provide information and testimony to the various imperial authorities who will want to hear his account, he finds himself confronting aspects of his condition that he has never had to face before. He thinks about the other custodians, his brothers in arms from the Great Crusade. How many of them still live? How many fell during the heresy? How many have been interred in dreadnoughts like himself, condemned to this half-life of service beyond death? The Legio Custodes was never large, numbering only in the thousands even at its height. 750 years of warfare, even if they remained on Terra as the Emperor's guards, would have taken a toll. The thought of Terra brings its own concerns. Aureus remembers the Imperial Palace, as it was during the Great Crusade, a sprawling complex of golden spires and vast halls where the Emperor walked among his creations. He remembers standing guard while the Primarchs held council, remembers the feeling of purpose that came from knowing he was protecting the greatest being humanity had ever produced. What has become of that place in the centuries since the heresy? The Navy captain mentioned that the Emperor is entombed upon the Golden Throne, which suggests something catastrophic happened during the final confrontation with Horus. How damaged is Terra? How changed is the Imperium? These questions plague him throughout the journey, but they are academic compared to the more immediate concern. What will his role be in this new Imperium? If the Emperor is no longer active, no longer walking among his people, then what purpose do the Custodians serve? Are they still the Emperor's companions, or have they been reduced to mere guards, watching over a corpse for eternity? The possibility fills Aureus with something that might be despair, if despair is an emotion Dreadnoughts can experience. He was created to serve the Emperor in person, to stand at his side and execute his will across the galaxy. To be relegated to standing watch over a tomb, no matter how holy that tomb might be, seems like a perversion of his purpose. But he is a custodian, and custodians do not question their duty. Whatever role he is assigned, he will perform it to the best of his ability, because that is what he was created to do. The cruiser's navigator reports that they are making excellent time, that the currents of the warp are favorable, and the journey should take only 3 weeks rather than the projected month. This is good news for the Navy personnel, who are eager to return to Terra with their precious cargo. For Aureus, time has lost much of its meaning. 3 weeks or 3 months, it makes little difference to someone who has already slept for centuries. During the journey, word of his awakening spreads throughout the ship. The crew members, from the lowliest menial to the senior officers, regard him with a mixture of awe and fear. He is a living relic of the Imperium's greatest age, a warrior who fought alongside the Emperor himself, who stood guard over Terra when the galaxy was young and humanity's future seemed bright with promise. To them, he represents everything the Imperium has lost, everything that has degraded and fallen away in the long decline from the heights of the Great Crusade to the desperate survival of the present. Some of them come to see him when their duties allow. They stand in the cargo bay where he has been stationed, looking up at his golden form, and they pray. Not to him, Aureus is careful to note, but to the Emperor through him, treating him as a kind of conduit to the divine. He is uncomfortable with this veneration, this elevation to near mythical status. He is a warrior, not a saint. He has killed and bled and suffered for the Imperium, but so have billions of others across the centuries. The difference is only that he has managed to survive through a combination of skill and the cruel joke of his interment in this mechanical body. A young rating, barely more than a child by Aureus's estimation, approaches one day with a question that cuts through the layers of formality and protocol that usually govern such interactions. "Ancient One," the boy asks, his voice shaking with nervousness, "are you still human?" The question hangs in the air of the cargo bay, and Aureus considers it carefully before answering. It is a profound question, one that goes to the heart of what he has become. Biologically, he is barely human anymore. What remains of his original body would not be recognizable as human to anyone who saw it outside the sarcophagus. Psychologically, he has been shaped by training and enhancement into something that transcends baseline humanity. And now, interred in this mechanical form, he exists as a hybrid of flesh and machine that defies easy categorization. "I was human once," Aureus says slowly, his mechanical voice somehow conveying the weight of the question. "What I am now is difficult to define. I am a warrior in service to the Emperor and to humanity. Whether that service makes me more than human or less than human, I cannot say. Perhaps it makes me something different entirely." The boy nods, seeming to understand even if he cannot fully grasp the implications. He offers a salute, crisp and precise despite his youth, and returns to his duties. Aureus watches him go and wonders what kind of Imperium this child has grown up in. What kind of world would produce someone who asks such questions of ancient warriors? It speaks to a level of awareness, of philosophical consideration, that seems at odds with the grim necessity of survival in the 41st millennium. As the journey continues, Aureus begins to prepare himself mentally for arrival at Terra. He will need to report to whatever authority now commands the Custodian Guard, will need to provide a full accounting of his time in stasis and his encounter with the Orks. Beyond that, his future is uncertain. Will he be stationed back at the Imperial Palace, standing eternal guard over the Emperor's resting place? Will he be deployed on missions across the galaxy, lending his capabilities to whatever forces need the support of a Custodian-grade war machine? Or will he be placed back in stasis, preserved for some future emergency that may never come? The last possibility troubles him most. To be awakened only to fight a battle and then return to sleep, to have his consciousness turned on and off like a machine, reinforces the horror of what he has become. But it is also the most logical use of his capabilities from a strategic perspective. Dreadnoughts are too valuable and too rare to risk in routine operations. They are saved for moments of true crisis, deployed only when the situation is so desperate that their unique combination of firepower and experience can make a difference. The warp journey nears its end, and the navigator announces that they will be translating back to real space in the Sol system within hours. The entire crew prepares for arrival, performing the rituals and checks that accompany a return to normal space. Aureus stands in the cargo bay, his systems running through their own preparations, ensuring that all functions are optimal for whatever comes next. When the cruiser finally drops out of the warp and real space reasserts itself around them, Aureus experiences something he did not expect. Through the ship's external sensors, fed to his consciousness through the cruiser's data network, he sees Terra, the home world of humanity, the cradle of the Imperium, the planet that has stood at the center of human civilization for longer than recorded history. It is not as he remembers it. The planet is darker, more heavily built upon, almost entirely covered in the sprawl of hive cities and administrative complexes. The orbital space around it is packed with defense stations and shipyards, a fortification network that speaks to a level of paranoia and defensive thinking that would have been unnecessary during the Great Crusade. And the Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon that allows navigation through the warp, burns with an intensity that seems somehow desperate, as if the very light is fighting to maintain itself against encroaching darkness. This is the Imperium that survived the heresy and endured the long millennia that followed. This is what humanity has become in the absence of the Emperor's active guidance. It has survived, which is itself a testament to the strength and determination of the human species. But it has not thrived. It has merely endured, clinging to existence in a galaxy that seems determined to extinguish it. Aureus does not know whether to feel pride at humanity's survival or sorrow at what has been lost. Perhaps he feels both, or perhaps he feels nothing at all. His emotional response is so dulled by centuries in a Dreadnought chassis that even the sight of Terra cannot truly move him. The ambiguity troubles him, this uncertainty about his own internal states. But there is no time to dwell on it. The cruiser is being hailed by Terra's orbital defenses, and soon he will be on the surface, back at the Imperial Palace, facing whatever future awaits him in this new and unfamiliar age. The universe of Warhammer 40,000 is cruel in many ways, but perhaps none more so than this: that its greatest heroes are condemned to continue serving long after they should have been allowed to rest, that warriors who have given everything are asked to give even more, and that duty never ends until the final destruction of both body and machine. Aureus embodies this cruelty, a custodian who died 750 years ago but was not allowed to stay dead, who awakened to fight a battle that should never have been his to fight, who will continue fighting until his machine body finally fails and releases him into whatever lies beyond. This is what happens when Orks find an ancient Custodian Dreadnought. They wake something that should have remained asleep. They disturb something that was never meant to be disturbed. And they pay for their curiosity with blood and death, learning too late that some things in the galaxy are best left alone, that some tombs should remain sealed, and that the Emperor's wrath endures even after centuries have passed and civilizations have fallen. The Orks on that nameless world learned this lesson, though none of them lived to share it with others of their kind. And Aureus, the custodian who stood against them, learned his own lessons about the nature of service, the price of duty, and the terrible truth that in the grim darkness of the far future, even death is not enough to release a warrior from their obligations to the Emperor and to humanity. The encounter between Aureus and the Orks represents, in microcosm, the larger conflict that defines the Imperium's existence in the 41st millennium. On one side, ancient glories and forgotten powers, relics of an age when humanity stood at the pinnacle of galactic civilization. On the other, savage and persistent enemies who care nothing for history or legacy, who simply continue fighting because that is what they were created to do. The outcome of any individual battle may vary, but the war itself never ends, grinding on across the centuries with a constancy that makes even the longest human lives seem like brief candles in an endless night. For those who serve the Imperium, whether as custodians or common soldiers, the lesson is clear. Duty does not end with death. Sacrifice is never sufficient, and rest will only come when the galaxy itself grows cold and dark. This is the grim reality that Aureus must accept as he returns to Terra, and it is the reality that every warrior in the Emperor's service must confront when they take up arms in humanity's defense. Victory is temporary, death is negotiable, but service is eternal. If you found this deep dive into the grim darkness fascinating, if the tale of Custodian Dreadnought Aureus and his battle against the Ork horde resonated with you, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Hit that like button to tell me you enjoyed this exploration of what happens when ancient Imperial might meet savage Xeno's violence. And drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Would you want to see more stories about forgotten warriors awakening into the nightmare of the 41st millennium? What other scenarios from the vast expanse of Warhammer 40,000 lore would you like to explore? Perhaps tales of other ancient warriors stirring from long sleep, or examinations of what happens when the Imperium's greatest relics fall into enemy hands. The lore of Warhammer 40,000 is vast and deep, filled with 10,000 years of history, tragedy, and war without end. Every world has its stories, every battle its heroes, and every relic its secrets. The tale of Aureus is just one among countless others, but it serves to illuminate the fundamental nature of the Imperium and the terrible price that humanity pays for its continued survival in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to see our species extinguished. Remember, the Emperor protects, but knowledge and discussion protect even more. Until next time, may your bolters never jam and your armor never fail, for the Emperor